So I have started to record, and occasionally I'm going to pause for just a few seconds because some people are still joining the class. Okay, so let me begin the slideshow here from the beginning. And today is May 4th, 2020. We have this lecture, and then the next lecture will be our last lecture, and then we will have the final exam on Wednesday. I think that's the 20th, from 1 to 3 o'clock. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, I hope. And the next exam is going to cover that part that we discussed last week about sole proprietorships, corporations, general partnerships through the rest of the semester. And it will not cover the marketing and data technology things that we had discussed and had tested you on in the previous lecture. Okay, so let's see, why isn't this moving? Oh, okay, now it's moving. Okay, I want to discuss very quickly leveraged buyouts and mergers and acquisitions. We discussed, again, what corporations are, partnerships and general proprietorships, and sometimes company A will buy company B or merge with company A and company B. They'll get together and they'll come together and become one company. In the last 40 years, leveraged buyouts and mergers and acquisitions have become very popular for a couple of reasons. One, the legal structure of the United States has made it easier to do a merger and acquisition. A merger is when two companies join together. An acquisition is when company A buys company B. A merger would be when company A exchanges stock for company B, and they become one together or merge. So they'll take all the company A stock and convert it into company B stock so that all the shareholders and the employees who had options and everything will be very happy with that. An acquisition is similar in many ways because sometimes they use stock to buy the company, but sometimes they just pay hard cash. And they give the shareholders hard cash, and they might give the employees some extra money to stick around for a while. For example, my daughter's company, she works for Meetup. I don't know if you're familiar with that, meetup.com. They were owned by WeWork. WeWork is going through a very difficult financial transformation right now. WeWork sold Meetup to a newly formed company, and in exchange, WeWork got badly needed cash, and this new company got Meetup, and the employees at Meetup all got cash bonuses to stick around for a while. That's what a merger and an acquisition is. A leveraged buyout is a little bit different. That's how you actually may acquire a company in an acquisition. And this has become very popular also in the last 40, maybe 50 years, and has made several multi-billionaires in the process. And what happens is you have a company, A, with its smokestacks over here, is a desirable company, and it wants to be acquired by someone or some other company. And generally, what will happen is the company will be acquired, and the buyer will borrow a lot of money from the banks and then use that money to take control of the company. It'll pay cash generally for the company. So the buyer in a leveraged buyout only puts a little bit of its capital at risk and then borrows the rest. For example, in a $100 million purchase, company A is going to be bought by a buyer for $100 million. The buyer will pay $10 million of his own money, borrow from the banks $90 million, and with that $100 million, he will buy this company here. And that's very common. And what happens in a leveraged buyout?
Of the actual loan?
Pardon?
So you only need 10% of the actual loan?
Sometimes it's even less than that. Depends on the name and the quality of the buyer. That's why they call it a leveraged buyout, because there's a lot of leverage. Remember when we were looking at accounting and we were looking at what we just defined as leverage, which is defined as debt divided by shareholders' equity. There's a lot of debt on the balance sheet and not a whole lot of shareholders' equity on the balance sheet when we're doing this. So it's very leveraged. So you can put down, sometimes it'll be more than 10%, sometimes it can be less than 10%. And then the nefarious thing happens because there's so much debt on the balance sheet, the company has to be run very, very efficiently in order to service that debt. And so what happens, the new owner will often go through very bizarre and dramatic cost-cutting operations where they'll fire a lot of the employees in company A that they've acquired. They'll close down a lot of the factories and they'll strip out as much as they can to get cash flow to repay that loan. So there's two arguments about that. One is when you have a leveraged buyout, it makes a company more efficient. That's one thing you can say. On the other hand, when you have a leveraged buyout, it can do damage to many of the stakeholders of the company. Stakeholders including employees, including vendors, including the community. So you might see major plants in the middle of cornfields closing down and there's no other employment for 100 miles around. So that's part of the downside of a leveraged buyout, but also a downside for an acquisition as well. Well, let's look at the type of mergers. We have two types of mergers. We have horizontal mergers and vertical mergers. Horizontal mergers are mergers where companies are in the same industry. For example, United Airlines and Continental Airlines merged together to create Continental United, or United Continental. And this was a merger of equals. And in the process of doing that, they had to coordinate all kinds of different things. The pilots union and the flight attendant unions from United was different from that of Continental Airlines. They had different aircraft, they had different mechanics, they had different locations around the world. So it was very complicated. And it's taken years and years for these two to really merge very carefully and well together. And it's still not fully in place. So that's a horizontal merger. Then a vertical merger is somewhat different. It's when two companies, which are in disparate industries, get together. For example, I think AT&T bought DirecTV. I think that was the case. So DirecTV is really a cable television company.
Yeah, but don't they all also offer like phone services and other things like that? I feel like those two companies are kind of in the same industry.
No, at the time they didn't. At the time, DirecTV was never offered a phone service. And at the time, AT&T didn't offer anything in the cable industry. And so consequently, we've seen this vertical kind of a merger happening. We saw the same thing, I think, did AT&T buy Time Warner as well? Where you had, again, a cable company buying a media company. Two very disparate kind of companies getting together. Comcast years ago bought NBC. Well, what was NBC? NBC is a television broadcaster. Comcast was a cable broadcaster. You might say, okay, those could be considered a horizontal merger. On the other hand, it might be considered a vertical merger. But just conceptually, I want you to just be aware that there are these two kinds of mergers, the horizontal ones and the vertical ones. And then you have the third kind, a conglomerate, and these are companies which will essentially assemble a group of disparate companies together and form one larger company. This was very popular in the 1960s. General Electric is a very good example of a conglomerate in that they have healthcare, they make jet engines, they used to make light bulbs, they don't any longer. The various different industries, they were in the real estate business, in the insurance business, disparate industries all put together under one umbrella. And the thesis being that although they're different industries and can be managed very separately, they can all have positive cash flows, they can all rely on standard techniques of management that the parent company has, and they can all prosper. History suggests that this isn't always the case, and it doesn't work very well.
Hey, Professor, so like Berkshire Hathaway would be a conglomerate?
It would not really be so much as a conglomerate as an investment management company that owns disparate companies. Warren Buffett doesn't have any single management kind of philosophy. And they don't have schools for management. They don't transfer people from his company A to his company B, C, or D. He's just really an investor who often owns a controlling interest in a company. But he's not actually an investor. Whereas in the case of GE, they have essentially almost a GE university, and the managers of the GE companies move from company A to company B to company C to company D within the GE umbrella. So it seems to have worked out reasonably well. Let's see, I'm just looking at a couple of chats that I have here. Okay, I'll discuss those later. So Warren Buffett is not a conglomerate. He's really just an investment manager who takes a lot of controlling interests. And you'll see there are other companies like that. For example, BlackRock is a company which owns a lot of companies through their private equity firm, but it's not a conglomerate. They just have investments in lots of different companies. Another example of a horizontal merger was Pfizer bought Botox, largely because it was able to give Pfizer a low-cost tax base. So those are the mergers and acquisitions. We're going to shift a little bit now and look at, I can get my controller thing to work properly, franchises. And we've discussed franchises in the past, and we're going to just take a little bit of a deeper dive into the franchises right now. Okay, we're familiar with the franchise system. And every franchise has a franchise agreement, a franchisor, and a franchisee. And as we've discussed, the franchisor is a company who owns the network or franchises the network, and the franchisee is the one who buys or leases the business from the franchisor. So a good example is Pizza Hut. Pepsi-Cola owns some Pizza Hut operations itself, but almost all the other Pizza Hut operations around the world are franchised. So Pizza Hut under Pepsi-Cola is the franchisor, and you and I can go out and we can ask Pepsi-Cola and Pizza Hut if we can become franchisees. And they will say to us, yes, you can become franchisees if you put up the money and you follow all the terms of our franchise agreement. And so you have the franchise contract between the franchisor and the franchisee. And the franchisor promises to give you a branded product, promises to give you some service. And in return, they're going to monitor how you're doing and help you in ways that they can. And you are going to give them money. And the money is generally a percentage of your revenues. That's a royalty that they typically receive. So the franchisor, which in this case would be Pepsi-Cola, Pizza Hut, will assign the territory to you. So they might say, I'm at the Jersey Shore right now. They could say to me, you can have the northern part of Monmouth County. They may provide some financial aid or financial advice. That's not always the case, but they may. They'll provide training and support. So you might go to Pizza Hut University and learn how to make a pizza and learn how to use their advertising and promotion, learn how to maintain quality control, learn how to keep your business prospering and healthy. They will sell you merchandise and supplies at what they call a competitive price. For example, the pizza dough, the sauces might be sold to you at a competitive price. But sometimes it's not so competitive because they have you under the franchise agreement buying certain supplies from them to maintain, quote, the quality of what you're buying, the quality of the pizza dough, the quality of the sauce. But they want to, because they want to maintain the quality of the merchandise, but the prices are not always competitive. And generally, business expansion is done using OPM. OPM stands for other people's money, meaning just like in a leveraged buyout, you put down 10% of your capital perhaps, and you borrow 90% from friends and family or the bank or the small business administration or whatever. Sometimes the franchisor will even loan you money. So in the case of McDonald's, for example, they wanted to get involved in some underserved minority areas. And they said, we are willing to lend you the money to lease your land to build your restaurant and open and start doing business. And in return, we'll charge you the regular royalty and a little bit extra because we've just provided you all this finance. So that's the franchisor. What does the franchisee do?
What does OPM stand for again?
Other people's money.
Thank you.
It's a fairly common term. It's a little it's a little obnoxious, but it is a term that people use all the time. And that's when you borrow money from friends and family, or you raise money by selling stock to friends and family or the community, or you borrow from the banks, or you issue bonds, but it's other people's money. It's not your own personal capital that you put into the business. So what is the franchisee doing? Well, the franchisee is paying the upfront cost to get the business going, making monthly or could be quarterly payments to the franchisor based on the revenues. The promise to run the business by the franchisor's rules and procedures, and they buy the materials from the franchisor or approved suppliers. Interesting, Holiday Inn franchises a lot of its hotels. So they have a lot of franchisees out there. And from time to time, you'll run across a Holiday Inn, which will suddenly change its name from Holiday Inn to Happy Inn or something like that. Generally, the reason that happens is because the franchisee from the Holiday Inn is not able to meet the quality standards that Holiday Inn insists on. So the franchisee leaves the franchise, and as part of that deal, they have to change the name. They can no longer be associated with Holiday Inn. Is everybody able to see this PowerPoint?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. I saw somebody sent a message. The link to the PowerPoint and course documents only has 2 slides. Would I be able to repost it? I will repost it. I didn't realize they had that problem. School told me it took everything. So what are the advantages of franchises? Well, first of all, you get a branded product that the world recognizes. So generally is familiar to people. Not always, but often that's the case. People know McDonald's, people know Pizza Hut, people know Burger King. You get the management and marketing assistance, so you have people who are well experienced who can advise you and train you in how to do things. You have the pride of personal ownership. Sometimes you'll get financial advice and assistance, not always, but generally they'll try and help you out. And franchisees have a much lower failure rate than if you just go out on your business and open up your own mom and pop operation. So you'll generally have a much higher hit rate as a successful restaurateur if you're dealing with a franchise, as opposed to if you decided to open up your own hot dog stand. The disadvantages are the high startup costs because you have to get the land, you have to put in all the fixtures and everything. Well, you'd have to do that in anything else that you were doing. But if you're not getting financial assistance from the franchisor, it could be difficult. You have to share some of your profit with the franchisor. You have to follow their regulations. You have to buy products from the franchisor at what could be higher than you'd like prices. You have the coattail effects. What I mean by coattail effects, if the franchise is doing well, you're very happy, things are going very well, that's wonderful. But if they run into a problem, for example, Chipotle's had problems with the quality of its restaurants around the country a few years ago, that had a devastating effect on restaurant sales throughout the entire system. There are restrictions on selling. You can't just sell your franchise restaurant to somebody else. You have to get the permission from management. And importantly, there are a lot of fraudulent franchisors out there. So you got to be very careful with whom you're dealing with. You've got to do your own due diligence on this. There are huge franchise conventions every year. The Javits Center has a big one every year in New York, where hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of franchisors display their operations, and not 100% of those are going to be honest and upfront. Then we have home-based franchises. And these are franchises that you can operate, what they call them, out of your home. Have a home office somewhere, give yourself a few cubic feet of space. You'll have flexible work hours. You have a better lifestyle. You can play golf at 3 o'clock in the afternoon if you'd like. You're doing the work that you like, and you can expand using technologies that are out there. One of the things that happened that's occurred over the last 40 years is that so many new opportunities have made themselves available. Okay, I'm going to just take a moment here and I'm going to lock the door. because if you haven't joined the meeting yet, it's a little bit late. Okay. And a good example of one of these home-based franchises might be something called Help You Sell Real Estate. This is a real franchise. I don't know if they're honest or dishonest. I just found them on the internet. But this just gives you an example of the kind of thing that you could do if you wanted to just start up your own business without a huge capital investment. So they have a startup cost of $15,000. You pay them 6% of gross commissions. They're not telling you what their annual sales are, so I'm a little suspicious of that. They say they have 102 franchises around the country. So I was just running some numbers in my head, and I said, well, if the average house is selling for $400,000 and you split the commission with the other real estate agents, so you're probably going to get about 3%. So that's $12,000. So you're going to give $720, which is 6% of $12,000, to help you sell real estate, and you'll keep the rest. That's my quick and dirty analysis of what the numbers are on that. But again, this is just an example of one of these home-based franchises. It's a no-name franchise, so you're not going to really be able to skate on their coattails, positive or negative, because people don't know who they are. But if they give you the training and if they give you the support, maybe it's worthwhile those startup costs of $15,000. Let's see. I get a message from Arkady Strasberg that internet goes out, in and out. I'm going to post this. I'm going to post this on YouTube if this goes smoothly, so you'll be able to see the whole lecture. So if you do lose me on the internet, that's okay. But I have to protect our class from people coming in and Zoom bombing us like they did a few weeks ago. I don't want that to happen again. And that's why I have to lock people out after a while. So I'm sorry about that if you get locked out. But again, if this goes well, then we'll be able to do this. Okay. We're going to shift now from franchising and discuss management. And this is really management, leadership, employee empowerment, and how you motivate employees and get employees to work. That's really the meat of this lecture and the next lecture. So the world has changed over the last 40 to 50 years, and I've seen all of this happening in real time in my life. Question is why? Why do we have to have new management approaches? Again, we've had global competition has become very, very fierce. When I was growing up in the 60s, you didn't buy too many things from overseas. And if you did buy things from overseas, they were really cheap and you know that they would break down. So back in those days, the Japanese products had a reputation for being awful. Stuff would come out of Hong Kong, Taiwan would be really cheap. And nothing came out of China at that time. It was still under communism. We've had myriad of business scandals. And we said we've got to really tighten the ships up so that we can do our best to avoid these scandals. There'll always be bad guys out there, so there will always be business scandals out there, but we want to make sure that we try our best actually not to allow them to happen. And we saw the great salad oil scandal, for example, in 1963 was an example of a major scandal that almost sunk Wall Street, were it not for the fact that John Kennedy was assassinated and his funeral day gave an extra day for the brokerage firms to get together. The world is undergoing constant and accelerating change right now. And with this acceleration of change, you have to be very flexible. The very fact that I'm talking to you on Zoom right now is a good example of how the world is changing. Never before had I conducted a lecture, or anybody I know conducted a lecture online to a class which is supposed to be live and in person. We have much better educated workers, so you know how to use the technologies that are out there and available. Those technologies didn't exist even 10, 15 years ago. And then the companies have been downsizing and right-sizing. I gave you the example with the leverage buyouts where they'll downsize the companies, fire employees, and give each remaining employee a lot more responsibility, but not more compensation. Maybe they'll give them more technology, but they don't always pay them more for the extra work that they have to do. Well, what are the responsibilities of management? What are the primary activities that they're involved in doing? Well, it's pretty obvious, I guess, if you sit down and think about it. You want to lead. Well, what does lead mean? We'll get into that in a moment. You want to motivate your employees so that they'll feel good coming to work and want to work hard for you. You have a lot of decisions that you have to make as a manager. And you have to figure out how to manage all the information flowing into your inbox, your email, and wherever you are, and therefore manage your time effectively, because you can't work 24/7 and not burn out. So what are the important management skills that you got to have? Well, first and foremost, you should be ethical. Um, the ethics really flows from the top down. If you have an unethical manager, you're going to end up with unethical management teams. You'll end up with corporate scandals and conceivably in jail. So you want to have an ethical management team which thinks about all of the stakeholders. You want to think about not only the shareholders, you want to think about the employees, you want to think about your customers, you want to think about the community, you want to think about your vendors. So you should really take a global view of who you're looking at. You have your corporate responsibilities, so you have to know what's going on within the organization. You need technical skills, and generally technical skills vary by industry. So if you're running a McDonald's, you want to understand the economics, not only the economics of the fast food industry, but the kitchen of the fast food industry. How does it work? If you're running an aerospace company, how are planes built? If you're running an airline, how are schedules created and how do we make things work efficiently? It's supremely important as well as having good human relation skills, because you've got to work with people. You've got to keep them motivated. You've got to keep wanting them to come work with you every day and do the best that they can. And finally, you have to have conceptual skills. You've got to understand the world around you. And you've got to be, at times, if you're really an effective leader, be able to think outside the box. What are the major functions that managements do? Well, if you're a senior management at the top of the company, you're involved with strategic planning, and we'll get into what that is in a moment, but that's really long-term planning. Lower down on the totem pole, you're involved with tactical planning, what's happening on a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis. Then there's the operational managers, and you want to make sure that, as we'd like to say, the trains run on time, that the company is operating as effectively and efficiently as possible. And then there's contingency planning. What happens if something happens? Supposing out of the blue, there's a global pandemic. Your company has to plan for that. If you haven't planned for a global pandemic and it suddenly hits you, and suddenly all of your employees have gone away, and all of your customers are acting very differently than they ever have, you're going to have a problem. So you have to have contingency plans. You've got to be able to organize effectively. You've got to be able to, again, show leadership. Again, be ethical. And good with your human relation skills. And you've got to have control over the businesses. You've got to be able to capture the data, look at the data, analyze the data, understand the data. So those are the primary functions of management. And when you come to the Zicklin School of Business, hopefully you'll pick up these management functions during the 4 years that you're here. So as you said, what are the key things of the management process, the key parts of the management process? Just a moment. It's planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And how do you do this? Well, you have resources. You have your employees, you have your financial system, you have products, you have your location, you have your information. So you have the resources here that help you with your management functions of planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. By the way, I would put leading at the top, planning, organizing, and controlling below those. And if you do it all effectively, you'll achieve your goals and objectives. So it's not complicated, but you have to be aware of this. So again, you want to lead, plan, organize, and control. And you want to use the resources that are available to help you achieve your goals and objectives. This isn't rocket science, but it's very important when you're involved in the management process. So what do? Well, step one, you want to plan and create a vision. You want to set goals and objectives. And one of the ways to do that is through a mission statement. Why does this organization exist? What is the proper purpose of this organization? You know, it takes companies long time to come up with 1 or 2 sentence mission statements, because it's so critical to understanding why we are here. What do we hope to achieve? And then the company sets goals. It has broad long-term goals, which are multi-year goals, and shorter specific ones. What are we going to do this quarter, next quarter, and the quarter after that? And then we're looking continuously at SWOT, which I think you're familiar with from your recitation sections: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You always got to look behind you because you know the competitors are coming up fast. So if Apple comes out with a new phone, they can be sure that Samsung may try and leapfrog them very shortly and offer an even better phone. And that creates conflict within the minds of the Apple managers. They're very insecure about those kinds of functions. And one top manager said to me years ago, he said, you know, I'm paid to be insecure. I'm paid to be neurotic, that my competitors are going to come up and do things to me and knock me off my perch. I give you two examples of mission statements. There's the Microsoft mission statement. And again, understand it took Microsoft a long time to come up with this. We had senior management looking over every word very carefully. And it says their mission statement is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. That took them probably months to come up with that and agree to that statement. And empowerment is the key term in the statement. It represents the primary objective of the company and what strategic tactics of the organization seek to achieve. So they're trying to, you know, they set out exactly what they want to do all over the world, and they use that term empowerment very carefully. And Starbucks has a different mission statement. Starbucks says, our mission statement is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. Now imagine them spending months to come up with this. It was so important, but they came up with this. It's specifically exactly what they want to do all over the world. And their purpose statement, they came up with a purpose statement, is to establish Starbucks as a premier purveyor of the finest coffee in the world while maintaining our uncompromising principles while we grow. Now, I have a piece of advice for all of you. When you're going out for job interviews, Google the mission statements of the companies that you are interviewing with. So you'll understand what their mission statements are. And importantly as well, you'll be able to reflect those mission statements to your interviewer, and they'll be astonished that you took the time to find out what their mission statement was. They'll be very impressed by that. But I'll give you a few extra kudos in heaven with them. So how do companies plan? Well, you know, the old thing is defining the problem. What is the situation now? Where do we want to go? And how can we get there from here? Now, the environment we're living in right now with this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, is a real laboratory for what these companies are doing. So they're all sitting back. You can be sure every company on the planet right now is saying, what is the situation right now? I'll give you an example. My wife, she has a Chinese acupuncture practice, very successful one in Midtown Manhattan. Situation now is the office is closed. Where do we want to go? What are we going to do? Well, in her case, she does want to reopen the office, but how does she reopen the office? When does she reopen the office? What procedures does she have to do to reopen the office? So how is she going to get there from here? So she's planning this right now, talking to some of her colleagues in the industry, seeing what they're doing, and hopefully she'll be able to reopen her office and rebuild her practice because her patients have all disappeared. How are they going to know she's back in town? How is she going to market to them, let them know that she's, you know, they can come in and get their acupuncture needles again or their Chinese herbs again? It's a big decision. Well, let's look at the planning functions. Now we'll look at bigger businesses than my wife's acupuncture practice. Let's look at a multinational corporation. Well, there are various forms of planning, and I mentioned them earlier before. We have strategic planning, tactical planning, contingency planning, and operational planning. The strategic planning is the broad long-range goal, and that's generally established by the top management. That's the president of the company, or the chief executive / president of the company, and his team of the chief financial officer, maybe the chief marketing person, the chief technology person. Lower down the level, you have tactical planning, and these are for specific short-range objectives. And this is, again, done by lower level managers. When you say strategic planning, we're looking at a 2 to 5 year period of time. Tactical planning is really from today until the next year or so. Then you have the operational planning, and this is the work that you're doing really on a day-to-day basis. And then you have your contingency planning. Again, what happens if the wheels come off the cart? What happens if you have a pandemic? What happens if your building collapses in a terrorist attack? What happens if there's a hurricane that knocks you down out of your business for the next 2 months? That's contingency planning. And I know from my own personal experience as having run my own hedge funds that the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, which regulates financial institutions involved in investing, insists that we have contingency plannings and that we test those contingent plans. So what happens if there's a COVID-19 pandemic and we have to close our offices while we all work remotely? Can we run our operations remotely? And the SEC says, show us your plan, show us you know how to do it, and show us that you passed the test when you tested it. That's contingency planning. And of course, these days, contingency planning is perhaps more important than any of the others right now, because if you didn't have a contingent plan and all this happened, you're in deep problems, deep problems. So again, if you look at the time span, top management goes 2 years plus, middle management goes from I say 2 years, but this is 1 year to a quarter, and lower level management goes generally week to week. Okay, I got a question. What is a hedge fund? A hedge fund is a financial institution which is similar to a mutual fund or an ETF, but it's, as we talked about limited partnerships, it's a limited partnership which only people with large amounts of money are allowed to invest in. You have to have at least $1 million, and in many cases $5 million to invest. And when we invest in hedge funds, we can buy all kinds of different things. We can go long companies' stocks, we can go short company stocks, we can invest in bonds, we can invest in commodities. It's a kind of institutional investment company. Okay, let's talk about, so we say top management is 2 years to 5, I say 2 to 5 years, middle management 1 year to a quarter, and the lower level management are days to weeks. What's the decision-making process? Just like when we discussed the marketing process, the first thing you want to do is define the problem. Make sense? Then you want to collect information. So you want to collect your information, and you can do that with primary or secondary information. And then with that, you can develop alternatives. And you'll have your management team look at the various alternatives that have been developed after you've collected the information. And then you'll decide among the alternatives which one you want to choose. So you'll choose the best one. Then you'll implement the process, and then you'll follow up. Did this work? Did it achieve the objectives that I wanted to do? This isn't rocket science, but it is the typical kinds of decision-making process that you'll see managements make. And you'll see this time and again whenever you're working in a company. If a company doesn't have an effective decision-making process like this, then you might find them shooting from the hip and introducing products that perhaps they shouldn't have had. On the other hand, sometimes you have a genius who sees something that the rest of the world doesn't see. So Steve Jobs, for example, saw the market for a smartphone. If you had done it this way, going through the traditional decision-making process, you might not have ever come up with a smartphone. Elon Musk came up with his idea for the Tesla, a unique kind of an electric car, which not only used a battery, but has all kinds of software, and it would allow us to do things like autonomous driving. Had you gone through with a top management like General Motors through this whole process, you would never have come up with the Tesla. Now, Tesla has shown what can be done, and because the managements have to be flexible, GM is now going through the rapid process of defining the problem, collecting the information, developing the alternatives, deciding the alternatives, choosing the best one, implementing it, and trying to follow up to see, does it work? What is a management pyramid? This is something that you'll see very often. Management pyramid is simply a representation of how companies work. You have at the very top level of the management a few people, the CEO, the controller, or the director of finance, various vice presidents. Then you have at the mid-level the sales managers and the plant managers. And then you have what's called the frontline supervisory level. In the frontline supervisors are, let's say, the foreman of the shop. So if you're in a GM assembly plant, there might be a morning shift. There's a foreman for that morning shift. That foreman is overseeing the guys who are assembling the cars on the shift. So you go from the top CEO through the mid-level into the frontline supervisory. And these are all supervising people. Managers are always supervising somebody else. And then finally, at the very bottom, there are people who are not supervisory employees. The good thing for them is they get paid overtime. If you're a supervisor and not an employee who's not a supervisor, then all these supervisors cannot get paid overtime. But if you don't have anybody who is reporting to you, then you can get paid overtime. Just a little fact that most people aren't aware of. So how do you organize your company? So you've defined the problem, et cetera. You've gone through the process. Well, you have to put teams together of people to work together. You have self-managed teams. So you get a group of colleagues together. You say, okay, we're going to work on this particular project. Please run with it. You have your various stakeholders. So you have, again, we talk about not just the shareholders, but we talk about the clients, the vendors, the employees, and the community. You have to staff the organization. And importantly, you want to add diversity to your group, because study after study shows the more diversity you have in a group, the better decisions the group is making. And again, when you're putting together a new operation and you've done all of this, you want to staff it with successful leadership. So again, you want to have a leader who has good ethics and good set of corporate values, who has vision, okay, is able to see outside the box and see things as they could be, not as they actually are at the moment, who effectively can communicate with you and can embrace challenges and does not fear change. So he embraces rather than fears change. So for example, a good manager right now in today's environment would be an ethical person, want to be looking out for all of his stakeholders, certainly his employees, but also his customers, make sure that his vendors can work with him effectively. You want to have vision and see, okay, here's where we are right now. How are we going to get, where are we going to be 2 years from now? How are we going to get out of this mess? Communicate to the employees and really to the stakeholders, what are the changes that have to be made given the environment right now? And then embrace rather than fear change. So in this case, this COVID-19 has created major challenges to managers. And if you embrace these challenges rather than run away from them, that also makes you a successful manager. And so you're going to see, as we proceed through this COVID-19 crisis, you'll see the really good managers rise to the top, and you'll see a lot of people will just kind of fall behind because they just can't adapt to the situation that we're in right now. So we are really in a cauldron of change right now, and it'll be interesting to see who emerges successful and who doesn't. Now, there are several leadership styles of managers out there, and let's go over them a little bit. We have what we call the autocratic manager. He knows all the answers to everything. He does not want to, or she does not want to run a democratic institution or organization. It's my way or the highway, you know that expression. If you don't like what I'm doing, you can leave. You're not a slave here. Go work somewhere else. And you know there are various examples of that. Donald Trump might be considered an example of an autocratic leadership style. Then you have democratic leaders who say, okay, I want to hear what everybody has to say, and we'll take all of what you say into consideration, and then we'll make our decisions. So you're very much involved in the decision-making process, providing information, and it's really a give and take operation. And Barack Obama has been said to have been more of a democratic leader. Then you have the laissez-faire, free reign, where the leader says, I know I've got the best management people working under me. You can make far better decisions than I can because you're much closer to the customer. You know what's going on. So you really run the show, and when there are problems, then I'll help you handle them. I'll give you advice, etc. Then you have the situational managers who say, well, depending on the situations, there are times when I have to be an autocrat. There are times when I have to be a Democrat. I want to be a Democrat. Maybe that's my go-to situation. And there are times when things are really running smoothly. Let's be laissez-faire. That lets me get out to the golf course a little bit more. And two other things that are important is, do you want to empower or not empower the people under you? And when we say empower, give them the ropes to do what they have to do so they can do it most effectively. Sometimes managers want to have control over the tools that the managers have to do their jobs, or the decisions that managers should ordinarily make by themselves, but your top manager doesn't want you to do that. Generally speaking, we want to empower our managers. And finally, knowledge. You want to make sure that leaders have knowledge, that they understand the business, they understand what's going on within their organization, within their industry, within their community. Let's see, I have 2 more chat questions. Okay, I think we're okay. Great. Oh, there's a question about the Business 1011 final. I'll answer it at the end of the meeting. And here's an example of a democratic and autocratic leader. Steve Jobs was an autocratic leader. It was his way or the highway. He had his way of doing things, and if you didn't like it, too bad. We could give you the option of leaving if you didn't like it. His successor, Tim Cook, is more the democratic leader. He'll listen to what people have to say, take everything they have into account, work with them so that they could have consensus kinds of decisions, and they agree that that's best for the organization. So you had one company with 2 totally different leadership types. Both of them were successful in their own right. Steve Jobs, as an autocratic leader, was very successful. Tim Cook, as a democratic leader, is very successful. So I'm not saying that one is necessarily better than the other. It's that they create different environments. So the autocratic leader will create a different operating and management environment than the democratic leader. So Donald Trump and Barack Obama, I'm not saying one president is better than the other, but they have different leadership styles, as you might see. Well, why would you want to empower your non-supervisory employees? For example, the baristas at Starbucks. When you're a barista at Starbucks, you're the lowest person on the totem pole at Starbucks. Why would Schultz want to empower these people? Well, realize that they are on the front line of the business. They are the ones who interface with the customers. Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks, is sitting up there on his throne in Seattle. He doesn't see what's going on at the Starbucks on Madison Avenue and 36th Street. He has no idea what's going on there, but the baristas know. So there's a lot of competition now, more demanding customers, and this is reflected to the people who are on the front lines, the non-supervisory employees, and this is what gives them. What happened there? This gives them the ability to get the information that's necessary. And when you empower employees, you loosen the formal organizational structures. That can be good or bad. It depends on the way your organization is structured. But you have fewer, busier managers who can work on other things because you know the people under you have been empowered to make decisions, so you don't have to worry about making decisions for them. And again, in today's world, if you're a Starbucks barista, you probably have at least a high school education and very often a college education. So you're knowledge intensive. You know how things go. You know how to work the internet. You know how to work the cash register. You know what's going on in the world. And you can bring all that you know to your job as a barista and to your job as keeping employees, your customers delighted. And remember, what are you trying to do at the very basic of a business? You want to delight your customers. You want to exceed their expectations. And these Starbucks employees are doing their very best to exceed the expectations of their customers. So there's a growing focus now in businesses on creating teams and project teams that can work together on various things at the non-supervisory level. And the belief is that these teams are far more effective than teams being put together at much higher levels within the organization, because these teams are on the ground, they know how to do things. They know what the customers want. Where do managers get their information from? Well, there's 2 sources. There's the outside sources and the inside sources. So looking at the inside sources, again, the management is coming from the bottom up, really, from the subordinates and the teams. Managements also have to take directives from their superiors. They go to many meetings and seminars, and you probably heard that 90% of all meetings are wasted time, but there are a lot of meetings out there where a lot of information is exchanged. The management information systems that have been developed by the companies over time. So there's many sources, and again, through the grapevine, although that's not generally a good source of information. Then there are the outside sources. Your salespeople, for example, are always talking to your customers. Your purchasing managers are always talking to your suppliers. The financial students are always giving you advice of what's going on financially in the world. Speak to other managers whom you meet at conferences around the world, various publications, academic consultants. So there's a lot of sources of information. And one of the problems with management today is there's so much information. You can argue there's too much information. How do they internalize all this information that's flowing into them and allow them to make better decisions? Step 4 is you want to control the operations. And this is very critical to any company because it's very easy for things to get out of control and to lose your information sources, to know what's going on, and therefore to begin to make terrible decisions. So the first thing you want to do is you want to set standards, specific standards. How many cups of coffee are you selling out of each of your units at Starbucks every day? Are these measurable? Well, yes, we can measure how many cups are being sold. Supposing Starbucks says we want to sell 1,000 cups of coffee out of a certain category of Starbucks outlet. Okay, is that attainable? Is that a reasonable thing? Is it the objective reasonable, or is it out of this world and impossible to achieve? Customer satisfaction. How do you measure it? You have customer satisfaction internally. Are your employees satisfied with the way things are going within your company? And externally, are the customers whom you're delighting or you want to delight, are they satisfied with what you're doing? And then you want to monitor and record all of this and compare your plan to the standards and the results that you had expected to see. Then you communicate this back to your employees, and then you take corrective action. Now, I want to get back to setting the standards because I think this is important. Yes, you want to set things that are measurable, but you want to make sure that they're the right things to look at. So Governor Cuomo, he sets standards that he thinks are important right now for defining where we stand with the coronavirus case. So he's looking at the number of new infections every day. He's looking at the number of new hospital admissions every day. He's looking at the number of people going into intensive care every day and the number of people going on ventilators every day. Those are specific, measurable numbers, and he has objectives that he wants to see happen, changes happen, before he's going to open up sometime, we hope, around May 15th. If we don't meet these objectives, he's not going to open up. And who is he satisfying this? Well, he's satisfying the citizens of the state of New York. Perhaps he has to convince them that it's a good idea to wait till after May 15th, but he wants to satisfy the voters who say that you're safe, we're only going to open up when we're safe and things are ready to happen. So he's monitoring this very carefully, he's recording this, and he compares his plan to what he hopes to see by May 15th. And he's communicating this not only to the people who are working for the state of New York or in the hospitals of the state of New York, but he's communicating this to all of us right now. And he's looking at for corrective action when we're not meeting those standards and results. Why aren't we meeting them? What can be done to meet those standards and results? And sometimes these standards can be the wrong standards. So for example, during the Vietnam War, Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense at that time during the Vietnam War, his standard was something that they could measure. He said, I want something so I can measure. What can I measure? He said, well, we can measure the number of enemy killed. So every day, every week, every month, he would get data about how many of the enemy were being killed. And the more enemy that were being killed, the more successful he thought he was being. Well, it turned out that was not the right measure of success. First of all, he was not getting good information. A lot of the reports were not true reports, and it was only killing a small fraction of the number of people who were being killed. And also, he didn't know how many people were waiting in the wings, how many of the enemy were in the wings. So, and he didn't realize that there was almost an unending number of people who were willing to fight against the Vietnamese government at the time, the South Vietnamese government at the time. So he was looking at the wrong set of standards, which were measurable, but they were the wrong standards to be measuring. And it wasn't until the war ended that they realized that. What are the management challenges? Well, it's always challenging to find good new employees. That's a rough task. There are a lot of people out there with a lot of resumes, but how do you know they're going to be good? And you want to, if you can, get the cream of the crop out there. There's growing global competition, as we know. The world has become more globalized. Maybe it will become less globalized after we go through this pandemic, but up until 6 weeks ago, it was becoming increasingly globalized. Have to find and serve new customers, new industries. Remember market segmentation. You want to find new segments of the market, reposition your products. How do you finance your long-term growth? You have to sell stock, you're issuing bonds. Is the market accepting your new stock, accepting your new bonds? And then there's increased regulation that you have to deal with. As the world gets more complicated, you're going to see more regulation. I think you'll see that coming out of this COVID-19 challenge that we're facing right now. Let's see. I got one question I'm just looking for here. We'll look at that. Okay, I don't see the question. Okay, so now we're going to look at how companies are actually organized. Every company has an organizational chart, an official one and an informal one. And the organization chart shows you the activities of the organizations and the subdivisions of the organizations and identify the different types of works that's being performed. So that you can take a look at the organization chart and kind of see management philosophy that the company is actually following. And here's an organizational chart, typical one. You'll see the CEO, the chief executive officer of the company, and he has reporting to him 2 divisional vice presidents, and each divisional vice president has departments reporting to him or her, Department A or Department B, and then reporting to the departments will be Group 1 and Group 2, and then reporting to the subordinate 1 and subordinate 2. And I want to take a look at the fundamentals of a bureaucracy. A typical bureaucracy, and this is a little bit old-fashioned, but the typical bureaucracy is you have a boss, you'd be the CEO, and you have the vice president, and you have the supervisor, and you have the employee. So it's essentially a chain of command, and at each chain there's rules and regulations who you can speak to and who you can't speak to, and it's set up by function, and communications is minimal between people outside of your function. An example of this is the bureaucracy in the military. So you'll see at the very top, you have a general, then you have a lieutenant general, a major general, a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, a captain, a lieutenant, and a staff sergeant. And if you want to do something as a sergeant, you have to go to the captain, who has to go to the lieutenant colonel, who has to go to the colonel, who has to go to the major general, get it all the way up there. It's very bureaucratic. It takes a lot of time for things to go from the bottom to the top and from the top to the bottom. But it works, it has its own way of working. The advantage is there's a lot of uniformity, there's less duplications, and there's maximum control. So if you want to send 100,000 people into battle, you want to make sure that there's a lot of uniformity there, that everybody kind of looks the same and does the same thing, that you don't have a whole lot of people duplicating various tasks because you want to stay focused on the mission and you want to have maximum control over that mission. The disadvantage is there's lots of policies and procedures involved, and there are many layers, and the layers make communication much slower. So this is really an old-fashioned way of doing things, and my guess is the modern army probably has done things that, although they look like the bureaucracy, have sped things up quite dramatically. And then we have what we call a decentralized organization chart. And here, a decentralized organization chart, there's the president, and the president has a bunch of different people reporting to him or her. And reporting to each of these other people, they have sales and marketing people. The president says, look, you guys are smart, you know what you're doing, do it well. And the Northeast region guy says, you guys are smart, do it, and do it well. And the Midwest region says to his or her folks, you guys are doing it, do it, and do it well. So they said, we trust you, we've empowered you to make decisions yourself to do things well. And by doing that, we're going to be, we believe, more efficient than if we just establish a set of rules and procedures that you had to follow in a bureaucratic way. So the advantage is that everybody involved can be informed on decisions. Each worker has more responsibility. And as you'll find in the subsequent lecture, the more worker responsibility you have often leads to happier and more focused employees. And again, here you have fewer layers and faster information going up and down wherever it has to go. The disadvantage of a decentralized structure is there's a loss of control. The president might not always know what's going on 4 layers below him, and there are no procedures that will necessarily say that he'll get that kind of information. And you could find yourself possibly having duplication. So you might find one group of people in one division is ordering supplies for, let's say, surgical masks from someone and paying $2.50 for that surgical mask. And in another division in another part of the country, they're paying $2.50 for the surgical mask. But if they combine their forces, given the size they are, they might end up paying only $1 for surgical masks. So there could be duplication and therefore higher costs. So decentralized is not all, where you delegate authority is not always in all ways a better plan, but it does keep employees more engaged, feeling better about their work, and has fewer layers. So if you do have to get information up to the top, it can get up there much more quickly. Rather than going through 7 layers, you can go through 3 layers. And therefore you'll get decisions, important decisions, because the less important decisions are made at the lower levels. The very important decisions are made at the top. Those important decisions can get to you much more quickly. So we're often asked, what is the span of control? How many people, how many groups can a boss manage? And that really depends on the complexity of the job. So if you're dealing with a really complex job, then you can't really have too many people reporting to you because it's really complex. If you have something that isn't complex, then you can have a lot of people reporting to you. So people say, well, what is the span of control? Give me a number. Well, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 20. It really depends. We really don't know what the actual span of control is, how many people can report to a single boss. It really depends on the operations. You know, the President of the United States, you might argue, he has everybody in the cabinet reporting to him. And the cabinet officers might have even more people reporting to them. It just depends on the complexity of the job. So if I ask on the test, what is the span of control? The right answer would be, nobody really knows. That is, if I ask it on a test. But what are organizational structures? Well, we have tall organizations with many layers of management and high cost of management. And the example is the military bureaucracy. You saw all the layers of management that are involved there. Currently, in the modern world, where we're not trying to do military operations, flat organizations are generally more popular. And that is, you create an organization with the president or the CEO, and he has various operations working under him. So you'll have manufacturing, research and development, finance, marketing working under him or her. That's the current trend. And then within each of those specialties, they have various teams working, and each of those teams are very autonomous. So for example, within the manufacturing team, you might have each of the different plants is running it very autonomously. So the plant manager is his own kingdom or her own kingdom. That the R&D labs are operating as though they're their own little kingdoms. So marketing is operating various places and various product lines as though they are their own kingdoms. And they create teams to do this. So these are all teams. And it seems to work very, very well in that the decisions are made much more quickly. The employees are much more empowered and therefore much more motivated and delighted to be working within their organizations. So organizations which have flat structures generally seem to have more efficient, effective, and happier employees than those in tall organizations. But again, some people have the mental desire to work in large bureaucratic organizations. They tend to be people who like to take orders, have somebody telling them what to do. And there are others who like to work in decentralized organizations where they're really on their own and they have to think creatively and work in teams with other people. Then there's departmentalization by function. And Baruch is a good example. The Zicklin School is a good example. So we have these various operations here. We have accountancy, the specialization in accountancy, economics and finance, management, marketing, and statistics. Now, the advantage of this is within each group, you develop a high level of skill. And there are also economies of scale, for example, the accounting magazines, the accounting publications, all of these things. You can just get one and it handles all the accountants within the accountant professors within the group. And there's good coordination among the members of the team, the accounting group, the economic finance group within the team, management, marketing. So the marketing professors all know each other. They decide who's going to go to which conference. They decide which publications they're going to subscribe to. And it all works kind of effectively and kind of efficiently. That's the good news. The bad news is there's a lack of communication with the other groups. So if I go back to the previous slide, the accounting professors don't talk to the finance professors, who don't talk to the management professors, who don't talk to the marketing professors because they don't have to. So there's very little communication, and the employees identify with the department. So the marketing professors identify themselves less with Zicklin and more with the marketing department of Zicklin. And so there's a slower response to external demands. So if somebody from the management department wants somebody from the marketing department to deal with an issue, the marketing department doesn't feel highly motivated to do it because what's it mean to them? And finally, you have narrow specialists so that the marketing people know marketing and little else than marketing. And I think I told you at first day of class, why do they have somebody like me teaching this course? This is run out of the marketing department. Well, because the marketing people really don't know very much about finance. They don't know very much about finance. They know a lot about marketing. They never generally run their own businesses, started their own businesses, closed their own businesses, dealt with employees. So they're really narrow specialists. Somebody like me who's been around in the world, worked for a number of different companies and different industries, and has worked with teams, had employees. I can add something to the spice, as can the other adjunct professors who are teaching this course. I put this together as just a typical line and staff organization chart. And again, we'll talk about lines and staffs in just a moment. But here you can see, typically, in a large corporation, you'll have a project manager, and that project manager will have various people reporting to him or her. There's an operations director under that person, and reporting to that person, you'll see the span of control of 4 people. And in the R&D director's case, has a software engineer, a software developer, 2 software developers working with him or her, and a hardware manager. So this is an example. And then you'll notice here we have a legal affairs director who just has a legal consultant working there. You have a technical service director who's there for technical support. But there's only one person who's related to the corporation, to the customer, and that's the product manager, who has a marketing consultant, a salesperson, and a customer service person. Companies also organize themselves by departments according to what they're doing, how they're structured. So at Zicklin, it's managed by departments: the marketing department, the accounting department, the finance department, the management department. These are departments. But you'll see at General Motors might be organized by Chevrolet, Cadillac, Hummer, by product line. In Tesla, it might be cars, batteries, research and development, autonomous cars. So it depends on what the company does, what they function. So you'll find, for example, a grocery store chart, organization chart would look very different from a restaurant's organization chart. And we talked about line organizations. The line organization is really the group that starts from the manufacturing all the way down to the non-supervisor employee on the line, or starting from the regional manager of Starbucks all the way down to the barista. That's what a line organization is. And if there's a line organization, you can clearly see what the line looks like. You know who your boss is, you know who your boss's boss is, you know who your boss's boss's boss is. And generally, you have one supervisor who you're reporting to. In the case of Starbucks, if you're a barista, you're reporting to the store manager. The store manager is reporting to the district manager reporting to the regional manager is reporting to the national manager. The disadvantage of a system of line organization is that it's inflexible. And they don't have a whole lot of specialists who they can ask for advice. And if you're a barista and you want to talk to the national manager, there's a long line of communication, and it's difficult to handle complex decisions. So we're talking about like an example of centralized management as opposed to decentralized management. Then you have line and staff organizations, and depending upon the kind of a company you have, you might find that to be very effective. So the line personnel perform the actual functions, contribute directly to the organizational goals. So the line personnel are like the barista, and then the store manager, and the district manager, the regional manager, the national manager. But you can't live by that alone. You need advice from other people. So you need advice from lawyers, you need advice from accountants, you need advice from HR, human resources. And so you have staff personnel are actually helping the line personnel. And very often you'll hear line personnel say to the staff personnel, you don't make money for our company, you're a cost center, you only advise us. But we're the ones who are really making money for the firm, so we demand more respect. And corporate legal counsel says, well, we keep you out of trouble. And the finance department says, well, we make sure that you get your paychecks every month. And the HR people say, well, we make sure that you're not discriminated against and you're treated fairly within the organization. So every company really does have a line and a staff relationship. Okay, I'm just reading the chats. Now we have another kind of an organization chart, which has really come into being in recent years, although they used them during wars. World War II was very effective with use of this. And this is the matrix organization chart. And generally a matrix organization chart is you have a specific objective that you want to achieve. And with that specific objective, you set up people who you need to achieve that specific objective. You create teams, and those teams can come from different disciplines within your organization. For example, you might have a project manager who's in charge of putting together a team, and he has to recruit people from the production group, the finance group, the marketing group, and the personnel group. And so the people who are recruited now are in a difficult situation because they know that they have a boss who's now project day manager who they have to report to and work on the project for that project day manager. But they also have to continue to work for the production manager, their boss. In this case, the production manager, in this case, the finance manager, the marketing manager, and the R&D manager. And so this can get very complicated, but it allows you to take people who really have highly developed skills from specific areas, working together with other people who have highly developed skills in specific areas, put them together in a team, cooperate with teamwork, and that helps with creativity. Just as diversity helps with creativity, bringing people from the different organizational parts into the company helps with creativity and allows you to more efficiently use your resources. The disadvantages is it can be costly and complex. Costly in that it takes their time away from their jobs that they're being paid for. So if you're an R&D person and you've been working in the R&D labs for the last 3 years, and suddenly your boss says to you, well, we want you to go work on this special project elsewhere for the next 2 months. Well, you're gone for the next 2 months, and your R&D lab is going to be missing your presence here because you've been contributing dramatically to the operation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have suggested that you go work on the project team. Again, it leads to confusion and loyalty. Who are you reporting to? Your project A manager that you're working with for 2 months, or to your boss who you've been with for the last number of years? And then it requires good interpersonal skills and cooperation because you're in a new team with new people. You probably don't know each other very well, if at all, when you start working together. And also, it's not permanent. So you know this is not a permanent relationship that you're going to have. So how much are you willing to invest in this relationship? So there are positive advantages and disadvantages to these matrix organizations. But we found that over time, they have been very effective in developing new products, new software, and it's something which has really added rather than subtracted to the effectiveness of corporations around the world. Managers are always trying to figure out how can you increase the productivity of the group. And we have this little mnemonic, TEAM, team, which I think is a little too cute. But it's teach other members by sharing your skills and strengths. So when you go into a team group, when you go into a company, you have things that other people don't have. For example, you folks are young, you're technologically savvy. You can teach the older people who might not feel as comfortable with the technologies how to do things, how to be media savvy, for example, how to work with Twitter, how to work with Facebook, how to work with Instagram, even TikTok. Older people don't know how to do that. You have a bunch of skills. You know how to work with other millennials or other Gen Z people, which boomers and Gen X people don't know how to do. You want to emphasize your concern for your teammates, knowing you want to have empathy in general for whomever you're working with. And if you can do that, you'll be a lot more popular with your team than if you turn out to be just an asshole, excuse the expression. You should ask and invite questions, be curious, because what you're trying to do is create the best possible outcome for the team that you're working with. And by asking questions, even if they're dumb questions, you might find that the answers could be quite interesting. And again, you want to motivate all of your teammates through praise and recognition. If you see somebody is doing a good job for you, then you say, hey, great job. Thanks a lot for doing that. Kudos to you. I'll buy you a beer when you're over 21. Okay. Well, that is really the lecture for the day. I've gone through all the slides. I have a few Zoom chat questions that I will go through.
Doing attendance verification today?
Oh yeah, let's do attendance verification. And let's make the code TEAM, T-E-A-M. Because we've talked about teams, matrix teams, management teams, empowering. Let's use the word TEAM, T-E-A-M, is a code for today. Okay.
But can you repeat that, please?
TEAM, T-E-A-M, TEAM is a code. Okay. A question about the final. Let's see, what was the question? I'm looking for the question about the final. Can you ask me the question? Because I can't find it on chat. Can you, oh, here it is. Who had a question about the final? Joy Del Gigante, did you have a question? I don't hear you, Joy, so I don't know what the question was. Oh, the final date. I think the final date is, let me pull up my calendar here. I think I posted that a while ago, but the final date is May 20th from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And the final will be given online just as the last two exams were given. And the final, I don't like calling it a final, it's just another exam. It's not like the typical final that you'll take in a course. It's just really the last 2.5 lectures.
Excuse me,
The
Professor.
final is just going to include this lecture, next lecture, and half of the last lecture where we discussed corporate structures.
Professor, do you know how the final will be given?
I'll be giving it on Blackboard, just as I gave the exam last week.
Professor, are you giving us one of those study sheets?
I think so. I have to see. Probably will do that as I've done it in the past.
Yeah, that'll be great. They help so much, like a lot.
Okay, yeah, I think I'll be doing that.
Thank you.
Professor.
Yeah, question?
So it was this lecture, next lecture, and then the half of the third lecture, and then we'll have it on a Wednesday.
It will be, yeah, that's right. The third lecture, the last lecture that we did, the last lecture before the exam, we discussed corporate structures. We discussed,
All that. So there's no class on May 20.
no class on May 20, that's just the exam. So
But
last week we discussed corporate structure with partnerships, general partnerships, proprietorships. That'll be
I meant
included
May
on the
18.
exam. And then what we did today and what we'll do tomorrow, next week. And then the
I meant
exam is
May 18. No
What was
class
the
on
time
May
for the
18.
final?
no class on May 18th. No, it's May 20th. That's finals week.
What was the time?
I think it's 1 to 3.
Okay.
I'll have
Thank
to double check.
What was the date again, please?
But I'm pretty sure it's 1 to 3 o'clock on May 20th.
Professor, so how many questions do we have?
That'll be 30 questions.
Thank you.
30 questions for the final?
Yeah, because it's just going to be 2.5 lectures. You know, it's not going to be
Our final
encompassing everything.
exam is going to
Well,
be just the two questions,
well,
two
it's
chapters?
It's just going to be the 2 chapters plus
Non-cumulative final. It's very
corporate
simple.
structure. Don't call it a final. Just call it an exam, which happens to be on the 20th instead of on the 18th.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay. It's not really a final. It's just an exam. I know you have other finals, which are probably going to incorporate everything that you've done all semester. This is different.
But this isn't cumulative. Okay.
This isn't
got it.
cumulative. It's just like the others that we've had.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is that clear to everyone?
Yep.
Professor.
Let's see. I had a question about, can I define the coattail effect again?
I don't see the attendance verification right now.
It's going up at 2 o'clock, I think.
Oh, okay.
Or 1:55, 2 o'clock, so it'll be going up. We finished up a little earlier today, I think. It'll be going up in 8 minutes. There was a question on the coattail effect. What is the coattail effect again? The coattail effect is, I don't know how to define it, but I'll give you the example. Again, Chipotle gets into trouble. They find that people are dying because they've been eating at Chipotle's. And there are Chipotle franchisees, and the franchisees from Chipotle are very upset because although there was just a few people dying at Chipotle's in San Francisco, all over the country, Chipotle sales are down dramatically. And they're suffering because of the coattail effect of Chipotle's. It's a negative coattail effect. A positive coattail effect might be Burger King introduces a meatless hamburger. All the franchisees therefore adopt the meatless hamburger. And Burger King gets a lot of publicity, a lot of write-up for that, and lots of people go to Burger King now to buy the meatless hamburgers. In that case, the franchisees are riding on the positive coattail effects of Burger King, that they're benefiting from all this publicity that Burger King happens to be getting because they introduced a new product. Is that clear? Okay, any other questions? Let's see, what else today? Oh, here's a question. Do you think the increase of hiring young people is good for the business model in terms of market segmentation? Well, I think if you look at Deloitte, which is one of the major accounting firms, Deloitte hires a lot of Baruch people every year. And what they're doing is essentially segmenting the market. They're saying, we want really smart people who are coming to Baruch because they're really smart people. They say we can get a great education and it doesn't cost us a whole lot of money. And often, not always, but often they might be the first in their generation or their families to go to college and therefore work really, really hard and are really, really motivated. And we like those kinds of people. So we're going to segment the market and look for these kinds of people who are intelligent enough to say, I know I can get a good education at a great price, and are really, really motivated people who want to work. So they say, we're going to go to Baruch and we're going to recruit very aggressively there. So in that case, you say they segmented the market. Let's go to colleges where we know that people are really smart and cunning in recognizing they don't have to pay $60,000 a year in tuition to get a good degree that's really recognized nationally. So they're cunning, and Baruch has a reputation for students who really, really work hard. So that's a good example of market segmentation by a company looking to hire young people. Let's see, I had another question. What was your experience as a portfolio manager like? Would you recommend it as a career path? I loved being a portfolio manager. I did it for 35 years. I got to go all over the world, meet some of the most interesting people in the world. I met everybody from, Nelson Mandela to, I don't know, George Soros, who I used to work very closely with, to George W. Bush, not H.W. Bush, but George W. Bush. I've met princes and princesses and had a wonderful time and met wonderful people in all walks of life. I also met nasty people, bad people. I got scammed a number of times. I had people who tried to bribe me several times. So it was a fascinating experience over 35 years. And the intellectual challenge of being a portfolio manager is marvelous. You have to take into account lots of information and incorporate that into decision-making processes for which you're responsible. You're making a lot of decisions under uncertainty because you don't know what the stock market is going, if it's going to go up or down. You don't know if managements are being honest with you or lying to you. So the whole thing is very fascinating. From my experience, being a portfolio manager was perhaps the most interesting job that I could have possibly had, and it fit my personality very well. It's not for everybody, of course, but it was something that I thought was just absolutely marvelous.
Hey, Professor, if we were considering like a career like that, how do you think we should like get into it?
Well, you're fortunate that you're in New York City, and New York City has a lot of asset management companies. You can start by looking at the larger ones. For example, BlackRock, JP Morgan Asset Management, Goldman Sachs has an asset management division. All of the major banks have asset management divisions. And you can say you want to go into those areas. I don't think it's a particularly popular area right now for people to go into. So you might find that there's more opportunities for you if you do go into those areas. So that might be an opportunity, a major opportunity for you if you're interested in doing that. I know when I got into the business, the stock market was not particularly popular at the time. And there were I was the first person that my company hired in 5 years. Not that they weren't looking for people, but there weren't people who were interested in going into investment management at the time. So I was surprised because I thought it was a wonderful experience.